Kim, thank you very much for joining me today. So I'm Bradley Handelaar, and I'm Associate Director at Danos Consulting, Head of the Consulting and Interim Practice within Compliance and Financial Crime. Joined today by Kim Heffernan, who I've been working with for a few years now. We met when Kim was Senior Manager at the FCA in the Authorisations Division. So Kim, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Let's start with how did you decide your career path?
Yeah, so I didn't decide straight away, actually. I studied modern languages and linguistics at university. Had plans initially to apply for the civil service fast stream at the time. I had a family friend that referred me to what was then the FSA, Financial Services Authority, but I'll refer to it throughout as the FCA. I joined as an administrator 3 weeks after finishing university, and as I say, planned to stick around while I applied for the civil service fast stream, and 17 years later was still there. And the reason why is because I loved it from the moment I joined, really learning about a completely new industry, financial services, but one that touches the lives of everybody in the whole country. An organisation that has the potential and the remit to have a really positive impact on people's lives. Across a whole range of policy areas and the whole of its remit, but also because of the people. So I met some amazing people, technically expert in their area, but also people that were really willing to give of their time and of their knowledge. And it made me want to stay working at the FCA.
Kim, what was it like to work for the regulator, and what was the journey like throughout your career and your time in the FCA?
Yeah, so I had an amazing 17 years, very interesting, worked through periods of significant regulatory change, hugely rewarding in terms of the areas that I worked in and the projects that I was involved with, and very hard work at particular times. Following on from my administrator role, where I started in the organisation, on to the FCA graduate programme, I undertook 3 rotations in different parts of the organisation. So the first was supervising wholesale firms in the supervision area. Then I moved to wholesale enforcement, so working on cases including market abuse. Final rotation was in internal audit within the FCA. Working in internal audit, I had a huge range of experience working on reviews and investigations across all parts of the organisation. And I was able to progress my career quite quickly whilst working in internal audit and studying accountancy alongside, as well as doing internal training in the organisations. And that's where I started my people management career in the organisation, which then remained a thread throughout all of my subsequent roles, and was easily my favourite part about all of my roles on the people management side. From internal audit, I moved to supervision, back to supervision, ahead of the FCA taking over responsibility for consumer credit in 2013.
Yeah.
So, and that was working as part of a big team, working with colleagues moving over from the Office of Fair Trading, learning from them, learning about a whole new sector in the industry, and supporting firms who were new to the FCA's regulation, supporting them as they applied for authorisation and became supervised by the FCA. And then in 2014, I applied for a senior manager vacancy in authorisations, again in the consumer credit area. So it felt quite early for me to be applying. I didn't expect to be offered the role, but felt that I had some technical expertise to bring to the role, and was amazed when I was successful, and as I say, became a senior manager in consumer credit, part of authorisations. Had 2 children, and then in 2018 moved to become senior manager in the approved persons area, so focusing on individual applications rather than firm applications in authorisations. So huge variety of roles within the organisation, and I think that's why I was able to stay there so long and have such an what for me felt like an interesting and varied career, because each new role was almost like working in a different organisation, because the FCA's remit is so large and the different areas are so different, that it felt like a new challenge and genuinely new opportunity each time I moved.
What was it like for you to be a female industry leader in the final role that you were in, obviously within authorisations of the FCA, and did you have any challenges in this?
I don't know about challenges really, because when I was thinking about this and thinking about Authorisations Division when I was there, and actually we had a female director, several female heads of department, I didn't feel unusual and it didn't feel strange. And I think one thing to emphasize about the FCA is that there were some really strong female leader role models. And the organisation, like every organisation, of course, has further to go around diversity and inclusion, and that was a key priority when I left the organisation for it, in terms of improving diversity and inclusion. But I certainly felt that I had strong female role models within authorisations, but actually throughout my time at the organisation, both formal and informal mentors and role models. I benefited hugely from seeing females in leadership positions, and I was lucky enough to work with some fantastic female leaders, but also to be mentored by some of them as well.
What was it like for you in terms of working for an organisation like the FCA, but also, in a senior female leader position, also trying to, getting to know you a little bit more, trying to grow a family as well? And I think you kind of mentioned, and we touched on a little bit around, I think, the job sharing, I think that, and kind of how flexible they can be, which is kind of what's nice to hear about the FCA, but I'll let you tell us more.
Yeah, so I think for anybody, for parents and anybody with caring responsibilities, juggling your work and your home life and your responsibilities is really difficult. So I would be lying if I said it wasn't really difficult, and at particular times it was particularly difficult at particular times. For example, COVID and homeschooling. Those were particular points that I wouldn't want to relive. My husband also has a demanding role in financial services, and he travels overseas a lot. So there were definitely times when it was challenging. We're lucky to have really good family support. So I had help with childcare from that perspective. Specifically from in my roles, I returned from my first maternity leave working 4 days a week in 2016, and then reduced that to 3 days a week in 2018, as you say, and was lucky enough to be able to have a job share arrangement with my senior manager job share partner. And I was so grateful to have that opportunity, because I think it's really challenging to find a part-time role at a senior level that still brings all of the interest and the challenge of a full-time role. So the fact that I was able to do that as a job share meant that I was able to stay in the organisation until 2021, and also spend 2 days a week with my young son. So it was challenging, because I as anybody working part-time would know, 3 days isn't always 3 days, so it spills over into your weekends, into some late nights and early mornings. But actually it was a really good opportunity, both because it's as I say, enabled me to do the busy, demanding, challenging role in Authorisations Division, but also because I got to work with and learn from my job share partner. We had a really strong relationship. We overlapped on a Wednesday, and I learned a lot from him. And I think, and I hope that we brought very different but complementary skills to the role. And I think we said about several pieces of work that we were involved with, we came at things from quite different approaches, but actually met in the middle. and we feel like the end product was better for the fact that we were both working on it together. So that experience overall was really positive for me, and is definitely something that I would consider in the future. And I think also set a really positive example to our direct reports and also indirect reports in the organisation, that we were able to make it work doing the senior manager role as a job share.
Yeah, I think it was always quite interesting to hear from you as well about how kind of flexible and amenable, I guess, the FCA was as an organisation. And we're talking pre-COVID as well, in terms of, I think, kind of the job sharing, the internal secondments, the more flexible kind of the flexible working situation. And I think obviously COVID has changed that for the wider industry, but it was already sounding like a lot of it was already kind of in place and being implemented already by the FCA already, which was good to hear. Yeah.
Yes, I think so. And as I say, I am sure that the organisation will go further again in terms of supporting people, parents, carers, and other people that want to work flexibly. But there were other examples, including at director level, of job shares, and I think that did set a really positive example to others in the organisation.
Yeah, perfect. And then I guess people kind of in a similar position to you, just starting their careers off, trying to figure out, right, what path do I go down? Because again, it's daunting when you come out of university, for example. You've got your qualification, right? I want to go and get a job in financial services. Where do I start? And we all fall into our careers. Quite a lot of us fall into our careers. I think we have an idea of what we want to do and where we want to be, but quite often we fall into where we end up. For example, I didn't come out of university when I did a real estate degree thinking I'd end up in financial recruitment, but it's worked for me, and that was my path. So what advice, I guess, could you potentially give to someone who's in a similar position, early career, whether even they've had a couple of years experience and they're still trying to find their path and where they'd like to go? What advice, I guess, would you give to someone starting off in a similar position in the industry?
Yeah, so I would say, so I definitely fell into my role at the FCA, and as I say, ended up working there and having a brilliant career for 17 years. So I think I wouldn't put pressure on yourself in terms of thinking I have to have my perfect 5-year, 10-year plan, because life doesn't often work like that. So I think it's okay to not to have that perfect plan. It's okay to try something, and sometimes that will work out really well, and sometimes it will show you an area that you don't want to pursue your career in, and that's just as valuable, I think, because we're all going to be working for a long time. So it's really good to try things, and some will work out, some won't. For one of the things I would say is, don't be afraid to do something. So I mentioned that my final rotation on the FCA graduate programme was in internal audit, which actually was a pretty unusual decision at the time. There were definitely areas of the organisation that were considered to be exciting and more interesting, and I think it's fair to say internal audit wasn't one of them. And amongst my graduate peers, I was considered to be a bit strange for choosing that as my final rotation. And looking back, why did I choose that? I think a couple of reasons, partly because I didn't, again, have a burning desire or a clear plan of which area of the organisation I wanted to work in longer term. So working in internal audit gave me that bird's eye view of the organisation, and then enabled me to find out about almost all of the areas within the FCA, which enabled me to choose my ultimate career destinations. We talked about female leaders and female role models. The head of internal audit at the time was a huge inspiration for me, and I wanted to work for her and with her team. And so pretty quickly after I started my rotation in internal audit, the FCA began its investigation into what happened with the supervision of Northern Rock. So, and that I was asked to work on that investigation, which was the final report of which was published externally and received a lot of external attention
Yes. Yeah.
from press and politicians, obviously because of all of the events that were happening in the financial market at the time. So what might seem like a different choice, an unusual choice, actually worked out amazingly well for me. I had a fantastic experience working on the investigation into the supervision of Northern Rock and the follow-up reviews that came from that. I was also asked to work on the investigation into what the FCA knew about LIBOR submissions.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Several years later, again, the external report was published, and that was quite a different piece of work and a different type of investigation, but very interesting. Got to meet some very interesting people, and I wouldn't have been able to do that type of work had I been in one of the areas that was traditionally seen as more exciting and more desirable as a graduate. So yeah, don't be afraid to make a different choice and do something out of the ordinary if it feels right for you.
Yeah.
I think and I hope that things have moved on a bit in the last 10 to 15 years, but my second piece of advice would be around take on board feedback, because that's how we grow, that's how we develop, and if given in the right spirit, it can be really helpful. But be yourself. So I spoke before to you, Bradley, about when I started at the FCA, I was young. I looked quite young. Having two children has changed that, and I did get a lot of feedback about the way I spoke, and not having gravitas. Basically, was the theme, and I took that feedback to heart, and it really did knock my confidence for a while, and it made me more nervous to speak in meetings and with external stakeholders. And reflecting on that now, I think I should have pushed back on that feedback earlier. And as I say, I think things have moved on. And so whilst feedback can be really useful, and I would never encourage anybody to ignore feedback, I think it's really important not to let feedback knock your confidence, and also to bring yourself and you authentically to work. And as I say, things have moved on, and I think there's a much greater appreciation now about authentic leadership being one's true self, and also strengths-based leadership. So we're all bringing different strengths to the table, and at the age of 27, I probably didn't have the gravitas of some of my more experienced, dare I say it, male colleagues with deeper voices. Brought my own strengths and different skills, and I think with the benefit of hindsight, I would not have let it knock my confidence in the way that it did. So take on board the feedback, work on what you can change, but actually value your skills and your strengths, and bring those to the table. Third thing, despite not having a very nailed down career path, or as the famous 5-year plan, I owned my own career from the beginning at the organization, and probably was quite challenging to manage actually at times because of that. Was very clear about knowing what my next step was in the FCA hierarchy, and how I could get there, and was quite demanding of my line managers about what I wanted to achieve, and how I could get there. And I think that's really important. So again, to be realistic and recognize that everybody needs to gain experience in their role, learn and develop before moving on to the next stage. But I think having that drive and owning my career and being very clear about the next step enabled me to progress quite quickly within the organization. And I also was able to take advantage of so many training and learning and development opportunities. So I studied to become an accountant through sponsored study at the FCA, which tied in really well with my internal audit role. And I also undertook the management development program at the organisation and the advanced manager program, and learnt a lot from both of those in relation to leadership that I was able to put into practice in my role, and also built a network of peers the organisation to learn from and work with. So I think owning your career and taking advantage of every learning and development opportunity is hugely important. And the final thing in terms of advice would be around, I mentioned it already, is about having mentors and role models.
Yeah.
So they've been hugely important to me in my career at the FCA. And one of the absolute favourite parts of my role was people management and helping people develop their careers in the organisation, and also to be able to mentor other people to give back some of all of the useful learning that was given to me. That was a huge passion of mine in all of my roles in the FCA.
Yeah, a lot of great points covered there, and actually echoing a lot of them. And to be honest, I think a lot of them doesn't matter necessarily even what industry you're in. I think they're good points to take for anyone kind of just starting off their career, and how to act and how to think and what to be like. And I know you touched on, and I think very important is obviously kind of, you know, have your own identity. You know, don't be scared to, you know, kind of pick your, you know, to take that feedback, but still keep your own self-worth and self-importance to you, because that is key, and is you building, you know, yourself as your own brand in a sense. And this is what I can offer, and making sure you kind of keep that drive. And then I think it's just really interesting to hear as well, because obviously, you know, being and having these experiences and learning and how you've come through the FCA, I think a lot of people could look at the FCA as sometimes just, you know, the big scary regulator. You know, they're the ones that are kind of implementing all these rules, and, you know, they don't quite get the FCA as actually as an organisation and as a business as such. So I think it's really interesting to hear your path through, you know, the support you had, the opportunities you had, and the kind of the career and path it gave you. So I thank you for your insight, obviously, to that as well. And I guess kind of for me, final point, while we're talking to an expert in the space within the FCA and the Authorisations Division, you know, a lot of people, you know, from speaking to a lot of people within financial services on a regular basis, going through authorisations and the process, and it can be a little bit, you know, strenuous, and sometimes, you know, what is it, you know, that the FCA are looking for? Can I ask you, as an expert, what advice you would give to, you know, an organisation or individual, whatever, going through that process, kind of from an FCA perspective?
Yes, of course. So I should say, as I said, that I did leave the organisation in
Disclaimer.
2021.
Sorry.
So yeah, absolutely.
Disclaimer.
So that's my disclaimer. So in my roles in authorisations, I was a senior manager in both the firm authorisation side and also approved persons. So I've seen both types of applications. So starting with firms, the important advice is to prepare and to research. So the FCA website is a huge source of information, and I think that's particularly true around regulatory change. So I've been lucky and unlucky enough to work through significant amounts of regulatory change, and the FCA produces a huge amount of really useful material to help firms and individuals prepare for regulatory change. So be that consultation papers, policy statements, specifically, specific sections of the website about regulatory change, and also the FCA's regular publications. So its business plan, and what was at the time certainly its risk outlook. So take time to research your particular firm's area, and think about what risks is the FCA worried about, and how, as a firm, will we mitigate those risks. So that's really important. Secondly, it's an obvious point, but to complete the application thoroughly. So to make the application, your application, as good as it can be before it goes into the FCA, because that should reduce the amount of toing and froing and the amount of time that needs to be spent on the application. And finally, to firms, I would say to reply to queries from the case officer promptly and comprehensively, because again, if you don't, that does hold up the process, and can lead to delays and frustrations from a firm's perspective, because there's, as I said, can be quite a lot of toing and froing with correspondence. On the individual's side, so the approved persons applications, a lot of the same advice applies. specifically with individual applications, if in doubt, disclose. So there is really clear guidance about what needs to be disclosed in relation to an individual application. For example, in relation to their regulatory history or any criminal records, for example, that an individual might have. If in any doubt, always disclose, because the case officer can then consider the information in the round. It may no longer be relevant, or they may well still be able to approve the application. But if there's a lack of disclosure, that calls into question the honesty and integrity of an individual, and it can cause problems for their application. And I would encourage individuals and firms to have an open and honest relationship and dialogue with their case officer. The case officer isn't trying to trip you up or catch you out. They have a really important job to do, ensuring that firms and approved persons meet the high bar that's set at the gateway for regulation. And so having that open and honest relationship is really important in terms of helping the application process go smoothly.
Kim, thank you so much. Really appreciated your time today. Great to hear, obviously, the story, the journey, the background, and obviously, how you got to where you were. And then again, appreciate those final comments as well, kind of on firms going through their authorization process. So yes, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's really good to see you.
And you. Thanks.